Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the 1100 Project podcast with me, Stuart White. Today we're going to be discussing some frequently asked questions that have been sent to me from the people in the WriteMentor Hub. I asked them what they'd like to know about self-publishing, and they've sent me a very long list of different questions that they'd like me to answer in this episode. And so I'm going to go through some of them and just talk a little bit about my experience with various things and what's worked for me, and what I've heard from experiences of other authors as well in terms of a few of the things. And hopefully that'll give you a wee bit more of an insight into some of the more commonly asked questions about self-publishing, especially for those of us who are just starting with it. I think that someone who had been doing it 10 years would obviously give very, very different answers. Someone who self-published in a different time from now as well would give different answers. But this is all based on being a new to self-publishing author in 2022/23. So I'll go through each of the questions. I'll give my best answer for each of those, and hopefully they'll be interesting enough and insightful enough that it'll give you a bit more of an update on how things are for new self-published authors. Just before I rattle into all the questions, just a brief personal update on my own work. So I have now uploaded all my files to the various distributors. I have set them all up for pre-order. So the 13th of February is a definite date for publication now for my middle grade, Ghosts of Mars. That's all definitely going to go ahead on schedule, which is both a relief, but also at the same time, absolutely terrifying. So but it's good that it's a bit more concrete than it was not so long ago. So I'm working very hard now on a lot of the other aspects of it, looking at sending out my arcs and proofs to various people and hoping to get some reviews off the back of that, sending out press releases and samples to various people that might feature the book, the character, the message behind the book, or something similar as well. The main character having type 1 diabetes means that I'm reaching out to diabetic charities and companies and organizations and hope they might share the book with them. And there's lots of other things that I'm trying to sort of link the book into and try and get some interest there as well. But yeah, from a personal point of view, there's a lot going on, although it's not the the writing part. And it's a funny thing, isn't it? There's a few issues with self-publishing. One is that you can't just spend the majority of your time writing and editing. You've got to spend at least half, if not more, of your time doing all the other administrative tasks and the potential marketing and publicity side of things as well, as well as a lot of dull stuff like your website and your formatting of your text. And there's a lot of different small parts to it that as a traditionally published author you don't need to worry about, and you do as a self-published author. So you need to learn a lot of new skills and tricks. But that's something I love doing. So I've quite enjoyed the process, even if it's been quite stressful at times. But yeah, so it's almost ready to go, and that's great. I'm really pleased with how things are going, both on the the writing and the admin side of things and so on. So we should have a nice build up now to the book launch, which is going to be on Zoom on the evening of the 13th of February. There's a link on my Twitter bio and in my latest newsletter if you want to sign up to come along and join in the Zoom room. And if not, there's a YouTube live stream happening concurrently, and you can just tune into the WriteMentor YouTube channel if you want to watch that live. And if you want to watch a recording, that will also be on the YouTube channel as soon as we finish streaming. So I'm very excited about all those things that are to come. But there's a lot has gone into getting the book to this stage. A lot of time, energy, tears, money, and a lot of other things, a lot of sacrifice. I've had to give up a lot of time on other things that I'd quite like to be spending my time on in order to do this. And of course, it's a choice, but it should be an informed choice. And that's hopefully what this podcast will allow for anyone who's interested in it, to allow them to get a bit more insight into the experience and therefore make their own informed choices about whether it's right for them or not. Similarly, there might be people who know for sure they're not, or they are going to do it, who are just listening along just for moral support or to just out of interest. And it's a pleasure to have everyone supporting the podcast. It's really great when I look at the numbers of people viewing it and so on. It always surprises me because it's quite I think of it anyway as quite a self-indulgent project, something that's therapeutic and good for me just to sort of record and annal the progress for myself. And it means I can, reflect on this down the line and maybe come back and listen to some of these episodes and see how I was feeling at the time and the insights and things that I was learning. It might be quite interesting to reflect upon later. But as I say, I was mostly doing this for myself, but I knew that it would probably help some other people. So it's great to see the numbers of people watching and subscribing and getting hopefully something out of the podcast. So let's get ourselves onto the questions and the frequently asked questions that I've been asked to go over in this episode. So we'll start off with there's a lot of these questions as well. They have a bit of repetitious questions in them, just along the topics and the lines that they go. So if I'll try not to go over anything more than once, but it might be that some of the questions touch on areas that have already been explained. I might just have to do a wee small recap on them. So the first question: how do you know when you're ready to go for it or publish? It's a really good question. It's one that's important to have an idea of or a gauge of in your own mind, because it's essentially the old question, how long's a piece of string? And it can be as short or as long as you want it. And it's the same with when you know that you're ready to go for it or to start going down the road of self-publishing. It's hard. Like for me anyway, I toed and froed a little bit. I think I spoke about this in an earlier episode, but I was ready to do it last year this time, and then decided not to, and then I'd said, okay, I'm probably going to go for it, and blah 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 at this time, and then I didn't quite follow through, and then eventually I got to a stage where I could have gone down the traditional route. I had an offer from an agent to represent me, and they wanted to take my pitch of my book to the London Book Fair and to present it to various publishers and so on, and to do XYZ with it. But I actually think that was the stimulus or the prompt that I needed to say, is this what I want? Because there was aspects of it not to do with the actual people involved, but there was aspects of that whole pathway that I felt a wee bit uncomfortable with, and being in that situation, I could see some of the issues further down the line, and maybe I was thinking too much about it. I wasn't living in the moment enough, and I guess I do this a lot actually. I'm always looking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead with everything in my life, not just my writing, and so sometimes that comes at the expense of the moment and me truly embracing or enjoying or taking in all the feelings of that moment. I think it's a strength in some ways as well. It can mean that I'm well prepared. It means that I tend not to make harsh, rushed, unwise decisions because I've looked ahead and I've seen sort of like Doctor Strange in Infinity War, where he looks at all the various outcomes that the Avengers can win, and there's only like 1 out of 3 million possibilities or whatever. I like to look ahead to all the different paths that the different strands that can diverge from that moment in time and the various outcomes, and to sort of analyze which one's going to be the best one to go down. So anyway, sorry, I'm rabbiting on a bit there, but I do probably overanalyze it and don't live in the moment enough. And I think if I was more of a live in the moment person, then I would have definitely jumped at that opportunity that I was given to go down the traditional pathway. But because I'm not, I basically I could only see problems further down the line in terms of going the traditional route for me personally. I could only see, and this is maybe my mindset too, but I could only see rejection, despondency. I could see failure. I could see if there was success, it not being the kind of success that I wanted. I wouldn't have the control or power over the process that I would want. I think that I filled my head with negatives of that scenario, and and this is the thing about self publishing, and it's why I think I've gone down that route. I can only, and this is in spite of being very aware of all the obstacles and potential pitfalls with self publishing. I can only really see positives for this pathway for me. I can't. I'm not seeing the same things that, potential obstacles for me personally that I would see if I went down the traditional route. So that was one of the reasons. Basically, that was a stimulus for me. I've explained it very in depth there, but that was a stimulus for me to say I'm going to do the self publishing, because I know that anything that goes wrong, aside from people's opinions of the book, but everything else is within my control. And so therefore, if it goes wrong, I can live with my own failure. I can live with my own failure. I just don't think I could live with being let down or failed by other people, or for something not to reach the standards that I would like. You're probably thinking, how could he possibly know all of this? And of course I don't. I'm just making best guesses, but I know myself, and I know my own reactions to things. I know my own feelings. I know my own mindset and my mind state as well in certain situations. And I feel that this is the one that will benefit me mentally the most, compared to going down a traditional pathway, which you really don't have much control at any point. You have control over the writing, of course, but then everything else out with that is very much in other people's hands. And some people might say that's a good thing, because I would be terrible at all those other jobs. And believe me, I'm not particularly good at many of the things that I'm putting my hand to now. But as I say, it's I will fall upon my own sword. It won't be because of anyone else with this route. And I guess that was me, the stimulus that said, yeah, I'm going to go down the self-publishing route and make that firm decision, as I did. It would have been like May or April of 2020 would have been the time where my mind flipped, and I said, yeah, self-publishing is for me. And I don't regret it at this stage. I mean, there might come a time in the future where I do, but at the moment I am very happy now that we're 8-9 months down the line, that I've gone down the right pathway for me. Okay, so I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that answers the question. How do you know when you're ready for it, or to go for it in terms of self-publishing? But that was it for me anyway, and it's got to be a personal choice. Next question is about advice on budgeting. Now, that's a good question to talk about money when it comes to self-publishing, and it's a good thing to make sure that you fully risk assess, that you fully analyze, and that you fully project financially before you even get started on anything. And so that involves quite a lot of research in terms of how much is it going to cost for all the aspects that you want. Now, the good thing about self-publishing is that you can do it on almost any budget. You can do it from next to nothing. I think at some point you're going to have to pay a little bit of money regardless of how you do it, unless of course you're just sticking an ebook on KDP, which, as far as I know, is free entirely. But if you want to produce paperbacks, for example, and so on, there's going to be costs when you upload it to various places, and associated costs as well with things like, if you want a good cover, you're going to have to pay for that. Very few people who are writers also can produce a knock it out the park cover. And I guess that's the other thing you have to ask yourself: is that what you want? Do you want your book to sit on bookshelves alongside other traditionally published books and look just as good, or do you want simply to get your product, your book, your work up there and be sold to people? And you've really got to be honest with yourself at that beginning stage and say, what is it that you want? And I was very clear in my own head about what I wanted, so that enabled me to then make a budget which was suitable for what I wanted. And in my research, I looked as though it was going to cost me about 3,000, maybe a wee bit more, to publish my book in the way that I wanted. And at the moment, those figures, that's not too far off. I've definitely, I think I've probably overspent a little bit, but it's not too far off that figure. And what I was able to do back with my thorough research on the people that needed to get involved, the standard, the expected pay in the industry for the various things and so on. By doing that, I was able to then budget appropriately at the beginning and come quite close at this stage to what I initially budgeted. One thing, actually, just while we're talking about budget, is something I've been looking at myself, is about audiobooks. And again, you can do audiobooks for free. I guess you could do your own audiobook, just get a decent mic and your computer, and technically you could create a file that you could upload. Might not be as professional as paying someone, but technically you could do that. This is a bit of a naughty word in the writing industry at the moment, but the AI narration is actually pretty good these days. It's not quite like if you get Word to read your manuscript to you, it's a wee bit robotic sounding. The AI narration now is very good, and you can get AI to narrate your book for you as well. Again, you lose that human element. It's if I'm listening to an AI narrated book, there's maybe just a bit of a detachment for me personally. So I have listened to both. There's quite a few authors now, self-published authors, who are putting up AI narrated books, and it's worth checking out a few of them if you're interested in going down that route to see how it sounds, because I think it sounds fine. It's not bad, but it's not if a human voice actor is always going to do a better job. There's human aspects to narration that AI is not as good at the moment, and might never ever be. So, but I've been looking at audiobook narration and so on, and obviously that is a very expensive process to get an audio file created by a narrator, a human narrator, for audiobook distribution, and it is something I'm looking at, but I don't think I'm going to do it immediately. Cash being the biggest thing, and so if you're thinking about doing this on a small budget, then obviously audiobooks is probably not within that. If you are Scrooge McDuck and you've got a big pool of money that you dive into every morning, then maybe that is a route you go down. And and I know audiobook is definitely one of the big growth areas in the industry at the moment. There's been a marked increase in the sales in audiobooks over the last year or two, and so it's not a bad thing for an indie published author, to consider going forward. But yes, bringing it back to budgeting, as I say, you can go from next to nothing, maybe 50 quid to upload it on Ingram Spark. The cover, it depends how good your cover artist is. I'm guessing you're wanting to be paying, in excess of £300-500 if you want to get a good one. More than that for an excellent one, and obviously less than that for someone either who has little or no experience, or maybe isn't going to do as good a job for you. But if you're not as bothered about the cover, then that's fine. And this is cover illustration I'm talking about. So if you're doing YA or adult, and you're doing a cover designer, the prices are going to vary as well. I don't think they're that much different, but the prices will vary because it's obviously a different skill doing a cover design than it is from illustration. So, and I guess, I think anyway, there are more templates out there, very cheap templates that you can buy for your YA or adult novel, and you can just sort of jimmy about with the text and switch up a few wee details and so on. But basically, the cover's pre-made for you. You can get it at quite a cheap cost. There's lots of websites out there that do that. Some better than others, I should say. So do your research. But if you're writing a YA or adult novel, you could get your cover via that. Okay. And yeah, obviously editing is another thing. I went through four rounds of editing, or is it 5? Oh God, it went on for a long time. It went on for about half a year. In the end, the editing. So it was quite it was quite intensive. But yeah, I went through all those rounds of edits. Developmental, line, copy, proofread, sensitivity read. I did all of those things from a novel, and that's something that most indie publishers, self-published authors, are not doing. And that, I know that from experience. I know that from surveys. I know that from what people say in their blogs and their podcasts and so on when they're chatting about it. It's not usual for a self-published author to go through that much editing. So again, if you're only going to maybe have one edit, maybe a proofread or a developmental edit, depending on what your needs are and how confident you feel about the story itself, or about your ability, on a line to line basis, your grammar, punctuation, spelling, whatever it is, you want to get edited, you could get away with one or two rounds of edits, and obviously slice your budget in half compared to what I've paid. But it's an individual preference. Part of what I'm doing with the 1100 project is trying to produce a product which would sit on the shelf with a traditionally published book, and the average reader wouldn't necessarily know any different. I think if you cut corners in your budget, you might get away with it. Some people do, other times you don't, and it just depends sometimes on luck, in terms of the cheap editor or the cheap cover artist that you've got. They might still be good and cheap, but sometimes they're not, and there's a reason why you're not paying as much money for them, and so that shows up in the final product. I mean, it's always personal preference with these things, and even with the things that I'm doing, I'm not necessarily saying that's the best way to do it. It's certainly, I'd imagine, not the most profitable way to do it, and I'm not necessarily doing this for profit. That's not my primary motivator in it. However, obviously, I don't want to lose lots of money either. I'd quite like it if I managed to get to break even point at some point with the book, and my investment is then recouped. That'd be lovely. But it's not the primary motivator with the decisions that I make, the creative decisions that I make there, based upon the quality of the output of the book that is going to be on the shelves or in people's hands at the end of all of this. So that I mean, I guess I've given you quite a wishy-washy answer there, but basically budgeting is based upon your own expectations combined with the amount of disposable cash that you have to invest into your book. And just while we're talking about investing cash, that is very much the way I see self-publishing. It can just be an artistic endeavor, and you could just upload it and cost you next to nothing. But I think if you are looking at self-publishing as something to maybe make you money at any point, you've got to view it like a business. And you're not going to get lots of sales and lots of money out if you're just shoving up a document and not spending the money in all the areas it needs to be spent. So like any startup business, you need a little bit of an injection of cash at the start to get you going, to make sure that the quality of what you're producing is high, and that you have enough to be able to invest in the things that are important for that particular thing. And for books, it's things like covers and editors are the two big ones, and all the other stuff is just sort of icing on the top of the cake. But you've got to bake the cake well for the icing to be worth putting on top. So yeah, that's how I feel about budgeting and so on. And I hope that hasn't put anyone off, because you can still I know authors who have self-published and self-published well on a very small budget, but that's where my own view on budgeting lies. So interestingly, the person's going on to say, is it viable, affordable to self-publish with a view only to producing a few copies of your book to give out to friends and family? And to that, I would say yes, because if you're only giving it to friends and family, you don't have to have this absolutely polished product that would sit on the shelves alongside and books that have been produced by traditional publishers that have had thousands of pounds of investment. It doesn't need to be of that quality if it's only going to family and friends. It can still be to the best of your ability in terms of your writing and your own editing and so on. But I certainly wouldn't be investing in a big money cover artist and big money editor if you are only going to give it out to a few handful of people. And yes, distribution to just a few people is very possible through. So Ingram Spark, for example, do that, although there's an upload fee for Ingram. So it depends, if that's the route you want to go down. You can upload the KDP as well and order like proofs and author copies and so on to be sent out to you. And again, you can pass those on as possible to do is the short answer. But maybe just going to a local printers might be a better shout than bothering to upload it to like KDP and Ingram and so on. So yeah, I guess personal circumstances will dictate the decision you make there, because I think a wee print run of 20 from a printer would probably be cheaper than going through all the processes, and certainly less time consuming, because learning all the various distribution websites and so on can take a wee bit of time. Okay, the next question was, and actually I've covered most of this, so I'll just skirt over this. It says, it's the money size of things that I'm most concerned about. Heard it takes around 2,500 to successfully launch a self-published novel, and it seems so unachievable. So many indie authors say just self-publish on social media as if it's super simple, but I don't have the amount of money just lying around, which is exactly what I was just discussing previously. If you don't have that money lying around, then you have to do it on your budget, or you don't do it, and that's a personal choice that you have to make. If you view self-publishing like a business and you'll get that money back at some time, then you can do, like, if you're starting up a business, you would take out a business loan from the bank for £5,000 or £10,000 or however much you want. If you're taking out a business loan of £2,500 from the bank to get your self-published novel done, and you're confident you'd make that money back, then you view it like a business, and obviously that's doable. But I also understand that that's a risk involved in that, and this is what I was saying at the start about risk assessing everything. I wouldn't be giving out advice that you should be getting loans to self-publish your book. I don't think that's a good basis to get started on. But it depends what your viewpoint is. You might view it as a small business and therefore want to do that, but it's a personal decision. People have got to decide that for themselves. But you can, and this is something I'll try and talk about a bit more rather than just my own experience. You can still successfully self-publish on a much lower budget than £2,500. That is the kind of budget that we're talking about when people are doing things in a similar vein to traditional publishing. A lot of self-published authors, and there's a survey. I can't remember who it was by again, but I was reading it about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was talking about the various levels of self-published authors, from people who are brand new to those who've done it a few times and so on. And on average, the people who are doing their first novel are not necessarily spending loads and loads of money on various things, and are doing it quite cheap. And one bit of advice that is often given out to self-published authors, and I can't vouch for this myself, having just started, is about quantity of release of books. So frequent release of books is as important as just the quality. So if you're spending £3,000 and releasing a book a year, akin to traditional publishing, then that might even be disadvantageous to someone who is maybe not spending a couple £100 a book and is producing one every 3 months. Maybe actually the person that's doing the more frequent launch is the one that's going to do better. Because sometimes with books, and it's because it's a creative thing and it's a story, and you're going to have different tastes and so on. Sometimes the one that is heavily manufactured and produced and has all the editing and so on, and a marketing budget and these things, sometimes those don't sell. And then the little thing that someone's typed up and is full of the typos, it's not been checked or anything, they just uploaded it to Kindle, sometimes that one does well. And you can't really account for things like taste and whimsy and what people actually like in a book. So I guess again, in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is you can just self-publish, and I know people say that on social media, and you can do it. I don't think I'd be happy with it personally, but some people can do it, and some people do it and do quite well. Similarly, spending a few £1,000s on your book is the route I would go down personally for me, but it's not for everyone. And if you don't have that money lying around, then it becomes a risk if you are having to get it from a loan from the bank or from a family member or something, or you're taking out your savings that are supposed to be for your family or whatever. That then becomes a risk, and you've got to weigh up, as the potential return on this going to be greater than what I'm investing? And then it becomes quite a business decision rather than a creative decision. And I guess that's the two mindsets that as a self-published author you have to have, and you have to have both switched on at most of the times. The only time really the business one can come off is maybe, during a drafting or even editing stage to an extent. But even then, it's got to be ticking away in the background a little bit. I'll maybe talk more about that kind of stuff later on in another episode about the creative versus the business mind and which one should be in charge at various points. But yeah, anyway, so again, sorry, a wee bit wishy-washy in the advice there. Again, the reason why is because it's very much circumstance dependent and it's going to be a personal choice for you. So I've given you lots of options there, and obviously you have to make the one that is the best one for your own circumstances. So the next question is a good one. The pros and cons of different ways or organizations that produce paperbacks. So the person said they've heard a lot about Amazon versus Ingram, but she's worried she maybe only will sell one copy to her mum. That's a good question. So there's lots out there, basically. The most commonly used ones are KDP for ebook and Ingram Spark for paperback. But KDP also do paperback, and actually what I will do is on publication day, I'm going to launch my KDP paperback account on Amazon. I've got the Ingram one going now for pre-orders, and that actually links, it merges with the listing on Amazon, so it kind of looks like it's the same thing, but it's not. And again, that's maybe a whole episode worth to chat about the intricacies of doing that, of doing the upload. But I've got it on with both, and it'll be distributed by both. And I've heard, I don't know this firsthand, but I've heard from speaking to and reading from other people that the Ingram Spark sometimes use KDP printers to print their books anyway, and they get KDP to fulfill the order if they can't do it. So, there's much of a muchness there between choosing them. I guess the key thing for that I've noticed anyways is to do with the royalties, and you get slightly different print costs with both, and therefore different royalties and profit per book, depending. And I can't give you any definitive numbers here because it depends on page count and type of book, and whether you've got color images inside, and blah blah. There's lots of different variants on the production of the book, which mean that it will cost more to print, and therefore you don't know what kind of margin you're going to get until you've got a final book, with the correct page number and all the rest of it on there. So you can do Amazon KDP, you can do Ingram. I'm also going to be doing distribution with Book Vault as well. If you've not heard of that, go and check them out. They look quite good. I've had a copy of a little proof sent from them to me. There's a wee bit of an issue with one of the trim sizes there, but I'm going to get that sorted before it gets released to people out there. But they seem quite good, and you get a slightly higher royalty return with them than you do with both KDP and Ingram Spark. So that's why I've got them as an option as well to sell through my website. It does cost a wee bit more because there's, I think their postage and package and it gets added on top of the price, whereas I think I do think it maybe takes a wee bit longer. It does cost a wee bit more. Just from looking at my own book, it might be different for different people, of course, but there's pros and cons of all these things. The good thing about Book Vault though is that I can link my shop app on my website where people can buy my book, and it automatically syncs to their distribution center, which means that if someone orders a copy of a paperback on my website, it will automatically go through to their distribution center for printing and be delivered to the person that's ordered it without me doing anything. All I have to do is make sure that my account with them is topped up with enough funds to cover all the costs and so on. And yeah, and I obviously take the money at the point of sale, which is good, because with other distributors they'll send you royalties in an infrequent basis, and so you're not getting the money at the point of sale, you're getting it later and further down the line, and that's obviously a disadvantage for some people if you're selling a lot, and you want the cash coming in at the point of sale. So Yeah, so there's always going to be these advantages and disadvantages to the various platforms and distributors, and that's why some people go wide and they have their book on all the platforms, and some people go with a preferred one that maybe they like and they get good relationship with, and the quality of the product and delivery and so on is good, so they just stick with them. Again, it's a personal decision. I think you've got to look at all of them and make that uh, informed decision yourself once you've seen all the facts. I personally want to explore as many different possibilities at this stage as I can, with a view to refining that at a later date once I know what works well for my books and what doesn't. And yeah, so I mean, it's a lot of experimentation at this stage. I guess there's no shortcut, and this. I guess people probably won't necessarily want to hear this, but with a lot of the aspects of self-publishing, the only way that you can learn stuff is by experiencing stuff, and the only way to do that is by doing. And you can read all the blog posts in the world, and trust me, I have. But until you actually do a lot of these things, you don't get the experience of what is good for you, what's not good for you, what's working well for you and your book and your sales and so on, compared to other methods. So, and that's something, as I say, I'm still very much experiencing and in the midst of. So I wouldn't want to give any definitive advice on the distributors and organisations that can get your book out, but we've talked about a few of them there, and there are loads more as well that I haven't mentioned and haven't myself got around to using yet, but I will try to going forward. So, next question: when you approach an illustrator, do they show you several possible sketches for your cover? At what point do you have to pay? Is some money up front and the rest when the work's done? And then the person said, I obviously realise this will be different for different freelancers, which is exactly what I was going to say. It's different for the different people you approach. The cover artist I worked with is represented by an agency, which meant I had to, after initially contacting her, and her saying, yeah, she'd love to work with me, I had to go through the agent and we had to do a contract. They drew up the contract, so that was fine. I just had to obviously check it and make sure it all looked good. And I did spend a long time actually looking up what everything meant and making sure that I was agreeing to what I wanted from the contract. But it was fine. They're an experienced agency, so they've obviously written up lots of these contracts and they seem to stand up. And obviously going through the agency as well. And this is something that a bit of advice for you. When you go with an illustrator who's represented by an agency, then there are some positives to that. You've got a bit more of a guarantee. You know that someone else has spotted that that's a very talented artist. There are a lot of advantages to it, but obviously the disadvantage is on the money side, because the agency will take a cut of the fee paid, and agencies tend to be quite big and they pay VAT, so you're paying an extra 20% on top of the fee that you pay, and all these things have to be taken into account when you're deciding which illustrator to work with. And so sometimes someone who's freelance, while they maybe don't have that guarantee that that you would have if they were with an agency, they will be cheaper as a result of that, or probably cheaper, because they don't have to give a cut to someone else, and potentially won't be earning 80k plus and be VAT registered. So there's other aspects to it as well that are worth considering when you're choosing your illustrator who you're going to work with, if you have a choice, of course. I was lucky. I just put out a post on Twitter and Facebook about it, and I got, like, to be honest, I could have chosen from 4 or 5 people. There was lots of brilliant people responded to that. I just happened to I guess take a liking to Jen's work just a little bit more than some of the other stuff, in terms of the tone and the type of sketches and characters I wanted for my book, and hers aligned more perfectly with my vision than the other ones. But a lot of them would have been good, and I think doing a little shout out for them and then seeing who responds is a good thing. And if there's nobody suits you there, then there's no real loss, and you can continue looking on your own for someone. But yeah, let's say you've agreed to work with someone and you get to that point. If you are working with a freelancer, they will probably have their own standard contract that they use. You just have to check it and make sure it's okay. With an agency, similar, you just have to check it and make sure it's okay. When I worked with the agency, I paid half up front and then half upon completion. The first time I got Jen to do my job, the second time she did a job for me, I just paid it up front because I knew the quality of her work already. I knew I was going to be happy with what she produced. I knew that she would come back to me repeatedly, as she did throughout the process, and say, "How does this look? How does this look? What should I do next? You know, do you think we should do this or this or this?" And was always giving me options as well, which is great. It makes my life so much easier, and I guess working collaboratively like that makes it easier for her as well, because she knows that at every point, you know, there's less self-doubt. You know that you're getting sort of directed, and the person is more likely to be happy with what you produced at the end because they've helped to direct the process. And I don't know if you would necessarily get that level of input with all illustrators. I don't have enough experience to know that. But that was my experience, and it was a good one. I was very happy every time I got an email from her through the whole process. I was very excited because it meant that there was a new sketch or a new thing to discuss, and I really enjoyed it. I've got to be honest, and it's something I would have missed out on if I'd gone down the traditional publishing route. And so that's again something to keep in mind. I would have missed out on that, and I really enjoyed it, and I'd work with her again. Depending how circumstances go, I mean, hopefully work with her for the short term anyway, and she'll maybe become too good and too famous for me at some point in the future, and she's working with all the big publishers, probably in a permanent contract with them. But for me anyway, I've enjoyed working with her, and I think you just got to pick, and also character's important. I should say that so have a chat with them and make sure they're the right kind of character as well, someone that you can work with and that are likely to be open to ideas, and like I've met Jen in real life now and so on. She's lovely. She's a great person. I really did luck out in her offering to do my cover. So yeah, I guess again I feel like I'm not giving really definitive answers, but that is because in self-publishing, I don't think there is a definitive answer to anything, and it can be done a million different ways. So yeah, sometimes they'll ask for money up front. Sometimes they'll say half and half. Sometimes they'll have a specific contract. Sometimes they'll be with an agency. It really varies depending on the illustrator you go with. And my number one advice would be, before you sign with an illustrator, go with an illustrator to have had a good look at a breadth and depth of portfolio and work from them. That's important. Even if an illustrator is new, they should have a decent portfolio for people to look in. If they don't, or if they're lacking in that, you might, I certainly would be questioning, oh, I don't know if I can't be sure they're going to be right for me. And the other thing, of course, is the character. So when you send out that initial email to say, this is my vision, this is my idea, do you think this is something you can deliver on it? Gauge the response from that, and that will give you an idea of what they might be potentially like to work with. Okay, so that's in terms of illustrators, that is certainly my experience, and that's the best way I can answer that question. Next one is, what is hybrid publishing? So my understanding of that is that it means that you publish some books self and you publish other books traditionally. So you have some books that go through publishers and some that don't, and that's a common model. Actually, a lot of successful self-publishers, also publish via traditional publishers, and they've got a bit of a hybrid model going. Other people have maybe done traditional publishing for a while and want to produce a new style or genre or something that's out with their brand that they've got with their traditional publishing, so they self it, and then they become a hybrid published author. So there's a lot of meanings to that, but that's what I gather in terms of the author. If we're talking about in terms of a publishing company, because the question wasn't 100% clear about it was the company or an author. So if it's an author, that I've explained that. But if it's a hybrid publishing company, again, my understanding of it is that's where they ask you to contribute some costs towards the publishing, and then they cover the remainder of the costs. I I've got I've got my own opinion on that kind of model. I mean, I think if I was interested in that, I would have done that a long time ago. If I'm honest, and so I haven't, and that probably tells you all you need to know about how I feel about that particular route. And it's maybe my personality. I'm an all or nothing person, so I either would want all the control, like I've got, or most of the control that I've got with self publishing, or very little of the control which you have with traditional publishing. And so I maybe that in between area just doesn't, that grey area doesn't sit well with my mindset, and so that's why I'd never choose it. I'm sure there are some people that have done that and have found that model works for them, but yeah, not personally for me. So that's my understanding of hybrid publishing. For hydrogen publishing, hybrid, not hydrogen publishing, hybrid publishing models is where you contribute a bit and the publisher also contributes a bit. And if you mean like a hybrid author, published author, then that generally means they've got some self and some trad published books. Okay, next question. I'd love to know if there are any sponsorship models, meaning a writer could self-publish without incurring the costs in the UK or elsewhere. Thanks. So that's a good question. Yeah, this can happen. I was at a talk at the SCBWI conference in November, and there was a couple of authors chatting about this, and they were basically talking about how they've had charities or organisations pay them to write a book about something associated with the charity or the organisation. So I guess that would fall under that umbrella, that sponsored model. They pay you to write the book. Yeah, I mean, out with that, I'm not sure I know of lots of opportunities to do that. I know that traditional publishers often get people to just write a book on a freelance basis. They pay them £2,000 or £3,000. Well, actually, I probably shouldn't be saying how much they pay people because it's a sensitive topic, and I probably shouldn't be outing those figures. Anyway, they pay them a bit of money to write the book, and they get no royalties. So that's, I guess, a form of a sponsored model. It's not self-publishing, but it's you get paid upfront for it rather than waiting to get paid in royalties. So yeah, that's another model. I mean, I'm sure there's more of that kind of stuff out there if you really, really look for it. But again, it's not something I'm hugely interested in myself. So it's not something that I know as much about as I'd like. But as I say, I know that it exists because a couple of people that I saw at the conference had done that. So yeah, so it does exist out there. What is print on demand? Is it possible to only have your book printed when ordered? Yes. And what are the benefits of Kindle versus hard copy? Okay, so let's start with print on demand. So print on demand is just basically where your book is printed when someone orders it, rather than with traditional publishing where they often will print thousands of books at a time and store them, and they'd get distributed to the various places they'll be sold from there, and or directly through the publisher website or whatever themselves. They'll distribute that in their own way, I'm sure. But yeah, so that's print on demand is where one single copy of the book is printed when you have an order. And so for self-published authors, that's usually the best way to go because it means you don't have to pay lots of upfront costs on printing and hoping you sell the books. You only print as you sell them. It means you don't have to store stock in your house, in your spare room or under the stairs or whatever, which is also obviously an advantage. It also means that you don't have to distribute them when orders come in, because if you do your own print run of, and some self-published authors have done this. I was chatting to Maz Evans back when she did it in 2014. She just basically printed off a whole bunch of books, 500 or 1,000 I think it was, and just took them to schools with her, and she went and visits and sold them literally by handing them out and taking the cash, old school. And so that model probably still does exist. But with print on demand, it means you don't have to do that. And again, it just depends on your circumstances. If you are someone who's out at schools 2 or 3 times a week or a few times a month, and you think you can hand sell 1,000 copies, then you could save money on costs, on printing costs, by printing them out and then getting a greater markup on each book sale. But print on demand just gives you that, I guess, that flexibility and those other advantages that I outlined earlier on. What are the benefits of Kindle versus hard copy was the second part of that question. So it's for the reader to decide, isn't it? I at middle grade, where I'm printing my first book, it's a middle grade book. It is, I think it's something like 94% is a hard copy of the book, paperback, versus only 4 or 5% on the ebook, the Kindle, and there's a few percent of audiobook and so on as well in there. But and that was, I think that's from 2020, that survey that I saw in terms of that. So habits might have changed a wee bit over the pandemic, but generally speaking, for middle grade and younger fiction, you are looking at people wanting paperbacks, hard copies of the book. That's what most readers get. Very, very few electronically. Whereas when you move up the age groups, so you go to YA and adult, a much higher proportion of books are sold via ebooks. And I think especially in the self-published sphere, the percentage of sales that come from ebooks is very high. So if you write YA or adult, having a good an ebook deal and so on is important. I think some people maybe only do ebooks, or they do various things, which when you're writing for kids, as many of us are, it's not as possible because kids don't browse Amazon and buy things for their Kindle necessarily. Certainly not the kids of the age that our target readers are. So yeah, it's different depending on the age group, the various advantages of each. But what I'm doing is I'm just doing everything. So I'm doing a Kindle version, I'm doing a paperback version. I'll eventually do a hardback version as well. But again, like my audiobook version, I'm going to wait to do that because there's extra expense involved in the hardback and the audiobook production. So I'll wait until I see how the Kindle and paperback go first. Okay, so hopefully, again, that's kind of answered your question on that. And then this is the last question for today, actually. And someone said, sorry if this has been asked or explained somewhere else before, but what about self-publishing just on Kindle or other platforms like it? Is it possible, and what does that involve? So I guess what the person's maybe asking here is about ebook only. And as I said before, it depends on your readership. Like if you're doing a chapter book or picture book or a middle grade and it's for young kids, then doing a Kindle only version will not probably see your book getting distributed as widely as you'd like. Having a paperback means the kids are going to be able to physically hold the book, and I know that's a big part of the experience for them. If you're writing for young adults or adults, then maybe you can get away with just doing Kindle and you don't need the paperback as much. But again, it really is about personal circumstances, who you are targeting with your book, and also, I guess, what kind of distribution you've got as well. If you're only using KDP, for example, or if you're using, like, I don't know, there's like Google and Google Play and Nook and Kobo and all these other iTunes, all these other places that distribute ebooks as well. I guess you can go wide. I think if you're doing ebook only, there's a lot of advantages to going with Kindle alone, exclusive, compared to with the paperback. So it's worth looking into that as well, because they do a lot of deals and ways for people to get access to your book on Kindle if you do your ebook exclusive with them compared to wide. So that's something to have a wee look at as well when you come to that point. But as I say, it's all very much case dependent. I'd need to know what age group your book is. I'd need to know who you're targeting. I'd need to go what your ambitions are in terms of the number of sales you want and so on. All of those things would factor into whether you just went in Kindle. But it is possible to do, and it just involves uploading an EPUB file to Kindle, which can be produced via formatting software as I use, or you can get a formatter to produce that file for you. I would just say, just on formatters, because I just mentioned that there, and we're on the last question anyway. I talked about this, I think, in the last episode, but I use Vellum, which is a software. It cost me £200, which sounds steep, but I can use that now forever. And every ebook I produce, and a good point about that as well is I have had to make several changes to the PDF and the EPUB, the PDF which is for paperback and the EPUB which is for Kindle. I've had to make changes to the files since I first uploaded them, just through edits and small things that I've spotted and so on. If you were to use a formatter to produce the files for you, you would produce your files, but then when you spotted something, you'd be like, oh, and you'd have to then send it back to the formatter and say, can you change these things? Can you change these things? And eventually, if you are the kind of person that tinkers, that would add up, and you'd have to pay them more and more every time to do that. And the thing about it as well is that is just for one book. Your next book, you have to pay another formatter, the same thing. Next book, another form, and eventually that will very quickly spiral to well over 200 quid. Whereas getting to know the software, getting to use, and I'm not a salesperson for Velv or anything, but check it out if you are considering self-publishing when it comes to the formatting stage, because as I say, it has made that part very easy for me. It's saved me a lot of money, not just in the short term, but I know it will in the long term. So it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're having to produce multiple formats like for Kindle or paperback or hard copy or whatever. Okay, so I hope that FAQ episode has helped. I hope there's been some insights there. I hope people come away knowing a wee bit more about the process. I'll maybe try and slot one of these in every so often, and that way I can talk a little bit more about what I've learned and share some of my insight. As you know, I'm only it's it's kind of like at school where I'm the teacher, but I'm just 2 pages ahead of the kids, that kind of thing. As I'm talking about all this stuff, it's not because I'm an expert in it or I'm very experienced. It's just literally because I've just done all these things, and therefore I'm talking about my own experience when I'm answering the questions. So it certainly shouldn't be looked upon as a self-publishing Bible or expert guide. It's just me talking about my own experience. All right, folks, so thanks very much for listening to this special episode, episode 9, which was a frequently asked questions about self-publishing episode, and I'll see you next time on the 1100 Project.